If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the views of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliates or sponsors.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The More Show, which is sponsored by the UFO Matrix magazine. On today's show, I'm about to be joined with our guest, Richard Freeman. Now, Richard is one of Britain's few cryptozoologists. His interest in unknown animals reaches back to his childhood, and he has a long and varied career working with exotic animals. After leaving school, he worked as a zookeeper in the Midlands. During this time, he bred many rare and endangered species. All in all, Richard worked with over 400 species of animals. In 1996, he took a degree in zoology at Leeds University, and after graduation moved to Exeter to work full-time at the Centre for Fortean Zoology, the UK's only cryptozoology organisation. Richard Freeman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, just tell us a bit about your work.
I am the Zoological Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. It's the only organisation of its kind in the world. It's the only full-time professional organisation that studies and searches for mystery animals.
What is cryptozoology?
Cryptozoology is literally the study of hidden animals, from the Greek kryptos and zoology. It was a term first coined by Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans in the 1950s. The work involves searching for creatures that are either unknown to science, but may be known through eyewitness accounts or from native lore, things like the Mongolian Death Worm in that category. Another category is animals that we may think are extinct erroneously, but are still hearty and hale, such as the Tasmanian wolf or thylacine, and creatures that have grown beyond their, well, what science says is their top size, which would mean things like the giant anaconda.
Before we move on to the creatures, in your introduction, we mentioned the words Fortean zoology and cryptozoology. Now, what's the difference?
Well, cryptozoology is strictly the study of biological creatures, animals unknown to science. Fortean zoology also encompasses animal mythology, animal legends and things, so it's a broader spectrum. But the bulk of my work, the lion's share of my work, is searching for and trying to prove the existence of or find evidence of unknown animals.
And what are some of the unknown animals on the land that you've looked for?
We've looked for the Mongolian Death Worm, which is a bizarre reddish-brown burrowing creature from the Gobi Desert, much feared by the natives. We've looked for the orang pendek, an upright species of ape, upright walking like a man, from the jungles of Sumatra in Indonesia. We've searched for the giant anaconda in Guyana, the almasti in Russia, which may well be a relic hominid, a primitive relative of the ancestors of man, and most recently the Mande Burung or Indian yeti.
So, how do you expect to find these creatures, and have you found these creatures?
The closest we've come is with the orang pendek. I've been to Sumatra 3 times. I'm heading off there again in September. Every time I've been there, I've heard the creature's very distinctive call. And every time I've been there, I've seen its prints. I've worked with all of the great apes in captivity. I'm familiar with their footprints in all sorts of mediums. The orang pendek's print is very different. The last time we were there, my colleague Dave Archer and the local guide Sahar Dimas saw the creature in a tree from only 100 feet away, and it climbed down from the tree and walked away erect like a man, not down on all fours like the known apes. We also found some hair on the last trip, which was analysed by Lars Thomas, who's an expert on animal hair, and his team from the University of Copenhagen, which includes some people who specialise in getting DNA from very old or very damaged sources. The conclusion was that this was from a large unknown primate.
But what's the proof that they still exist now?
People still report them. Since we were returned from Sumatra, I've heard of dozens of reports of the creature. This is from native people who know what they're talking about. They know the difference between the orang pendek and a sun bear, or the orang pendek and a Siamang gibbon.
So then why hasn't other researchers or mainstream science sort of, followed your path?
Science has fallen into a rut. It's become almost like a fundamentalist religion. People seem too frightened to pursue anything that might be even slightly controversial. They're worried about their funding, they're worried about what their peers might think. Now, back in Victorian days, there's this great ethos of exploration and discovery, which seems to have died. And to be honest, mainstream science needs a good hard kick up the backside to get it out of this rut. A case in point, a colleague of mine back in the 1990s brought back some hair from Sumatra, which he thought was from the orang pendek.
Yeah.
It was examined by Professor Hans Brunner, the world's leading expert on mammal hair. He was involved in the case in Australia where the poor woman got locked up because she thought she'd murdered her baby, and it was actually taken by a dingo. He was the guy that proved it was a dingo, or helped to prove that it was a dingo, because he identified the hair. He looked at this hair, and he said, this is a new species of ape. It's related to the orangutan, but it's distinct from the orangutan. And my colleague and Professor Brunner prepared a paper, and they gave it to the magazine Nature, and the editor of Nature refused to print it. And his excuse was, it was a large animal, so it's too controversial. If this had been a species of mouse, we would have printed it. Now that is utterly absurd and completely unscientific, and that gives you some idea of the rut that mainstream science is in. A physicist is perfectly capable of writing a book or a paper on particles that no one has ever seen. But if someone writes a book on an unknown species of animal that thousands of people have seen, they're looked on as a heretic, a scientific heretic, and it's insane.
Where does that sort of skepticism stem from? I mean, it's pandemic, obviously, in a lot of people's thinking, because obviously they'll be listening to this and thinking, well, I've never seen one, so it can't be true.
I've never seen a Sumatran rhinoceros, but I know they exist. Some animals are known only from a single skull or a couple of bones, and people still say, yes, these animals exist. I'm sure they do. There's certain types of beaked whale that have never been seen in the flesh. So why should the orang pendek and other creatures like it not exist? And there's an overweening arrogance as well in mainstream science with people sitting in these ivory towers in their safe little laboratories and lecture halls, holding forth on what can or can't exist, as a lot like some sort of gods. The discoveries are to be made in the jungles, the mountains, the deserts, the forests, the seas. They're not going to be made by idiots sitting in lecture halls saying, oh no, this can't exist. It's just native nonsense. Savages, I would have known about it if it existed. It's just fairy tales by savages.
And do you think they're like that because they, some people just live in the academic world, for example, and don't go into the world as such? Because one thing I notice about you, Richard, is that you travel a lot. You go out there looking for it.
Yeah. Like I say, if you don't look, you're not going to find.
No, you're not. And what have you found that got very close to?
The orang pendek is the thing that we got closest to. We're back out there in September. I'm convinced it exists. Like I say, I've heard the call of the creature every time I've been there. My friends seen it. I've met so many witnesses who have seen it, who have got absolutely no reason to lie. They've got nothing they could possibly gain by lying. And a lot of the time, when we talk to local people about the creatures they've seen, they're puzzled as to why we're so interested, because they just think they're another part of the local fauna. When we were in Kabardino-Balkaria, in the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, looking for the almasty, which may be a relic hominid, I always remember one of the witnesses we spoke to, an old lady who had seen one of these things in the 40s, said, why are you so interested in such a crazy topic? What's so fascinating about it? They just accept them as another part of the local fauna, like bears and wolves and what have you.
Do you think you'll find one in your lifetime?
I certainly hope so. The hardest thing about it is funding. To be honest, I don't care what mainstream science says or does or thinks about me. The hardest thing is finding the funding to get out there and do it. If I had the funding to go and look for these things properly, and it could take months and months or years and years, I would come up with something. The first time they tried to go and film snow leopards in the wild, it took them 6 years to film them. So there's an example of how elusive a wild animal can be.
So we're calling all billionaires right now to maybe help you out with this research, because it's a hard time to carry out this research, in a financial slowdown as well, which we're still in.
It's always been hard, and it's harder than ever now. But if there's anybody out there that's interested in funding us, or any company, I mean, I'm not adverse to wearing a company logo T-shirt or calling the expedition the whatever the company's name is expedition, and plugging their product or whatever it is, if they're financially helping out on an expedition, it will be, in fact, it'd be wonderful. I mean, I have approached companies in the past, but we've had very little interest.
So what does Richard Freeman do apart from this then?
I write a lot. When I'm not doing field work, I'm writing books. I'm researching. That's mainly what I do.
A lot of research, a lot of writing, which has, of course, led you to write some great books as well, and we'll go over your books in just a bit. Now, I want to get to Bigfoot, because that's a favourite of mine, and, what do you think of the existence of a Bigfoot?
It depends. Are we talking about specifically about the North American Bigfoot, or are we talking about similar creatures around the world?
What's the difference?
Well, it appears that there's not just one creature, one type of creature we're dealing with. There seems to be 5 or 6 large unknown primates, at least, living in the world today.
Tell us a bit about the difference between these particular 5.
Well, in Asia, the creature that we refer to as the yeti, which is a term that means rock beast, there seems to be 3 distinct types. There's a very large type, which is 8 to 10 feet tall, walks erect like a man, is covered with black or dark brown fur, is reported from Tibet, parts of Nepal, northern India, and other areas. That's the classic yeti. Then there is a medium-sized creature which moves on all 4s and erect like a man, which is about 6 feet tall, which we think may be a mainland species of orangutan. Then there's a much smaller one, 3 to 5 feet tall, which is distinct again and may be related to the orang pendek of Sumatra. It may be a subspecies of the same creature. In North America, we have the Sasquatch, which is very similar to the yeti.
Yeah.
The yeti and related creatures in Asia, such as the yeren in China and the Mandai burung in northern India, it's a rose is a rose by any other name. Let's call them yetis to keep it simple. All seem to be the same animal. Sasquatch, Bigfoot seems very similar. It could be that they are a descendant of a giant ape that lived in the Pleistocene period. It's known from fossils around 300,000 years old, fossilised teeth and jaws. The shape of the jaws makes us think that this thing was probably a biped and would have stood around 10 feet tall. Its name's Gigantopithecus blacki. Now, aside from those, we also have the almasti, which is a much more human-like creature. It's smaller than the classic yeti, about 6.5, 7 feet tall, very powerfully built, but looking much more human-like. It has a thick brow, no facial hair, receding brow, receding chin.
Yeah.
But it's more human-like. All of these creatures have been known to use primitive tools. They'll throw rocks, use clubs. None of them seem to have fire. But the almasti is much more man-like in its appearance and its behaviour, and it seems to approach human habitation a lot more. The theory with that is that it is a hominid rather than an ape. It's a relative of man's ancestors, possibly another descendant of Homo erectus, the creature which begat us, begat the Neanderthals, begat Homo floresiensis and other species.
Again, it sounds like it's quite a friendly species from what you've said there, and it's not attacked anyone as such, has it?
The almasti seems remarkably passive. It's not at all aggressive unless provoked. There are stories of it getting aggressive if it's pushed far enough. There's one story about a guard dog on a farm that attacked one of these things, and the almasti used a club to kill the guard dog and then carried off a large cheese from the house. And there's another story about one being seen near a grain store, and the farmer threw a stone at it because he wanted to drive it away from his grain store, and the thing picked up a huge rock, which apparently took 2 men to move when it was investigated later, and hurled it at him. And he actually hurled it over the guy's house and narrowly missed him. Another guy we heard about actually tried to punch one of these things when he saw it, because he was alarmed, and it gave him an open-handed slap, not a punch, an open-handed slap that knocked him 15 feet. So they're immensely strong, but they're not particularly aggressive.
But wouldn't that show signs of intelligence, though?
Well, all these things are fairly intelligent. We know apes are very intelligent. They're tool users, so things like the yeti and the orang pendek would be just as intelligent. The almasti perhaps even more so, because it's a hominid.
But what about the connection with the sort of Bigfoot and the paranormal ufology side? I mean, I've mentioned to this before today, before we started this conversation. Is there a connection between, ufology and the paranormal?
Well, I think most UFOs may be quite explicable as poorly known or poorly understood meteorological or geophysical manifestations, something perfectly natural. Also, some things might be military craft being tested. Ufology is not my field, and I'll confess I'm not very interested in ufology at all. There are these odd cases where you get clusters of phenomenon, strange lights in the sky seen at the same time as animal mutilations, upright walking hairy creatures, other strange beasts, all clustering together. Oftentimes these happen in places where you couldn't really have a population of large primates living undetected. So I think we're moving away from true biological to something stranger. Maybe it's something to do with how the human mind is set up and how it reacts to its environment under certain conditions. Now, there's a theory I've got called the global monster template. Everywhere you go, all over the world, you'll get the same sorts of monsters. You'll get monstrous reptiles, dragons, and their various analogues.
Yeah.
You'll get hairy giants, you'll get little people, you'll get monstrous birds, monstrous dogs, and monstrous cats. Now, if we cast our minds back 3 million years to the plains of East Africa, our Australopithecine ancestors, they would have been preyed on by crocodiles and pythons, by large martial eagles. They would have been attacked by lions and leopards, African hunting dogs, and they would have been in direct competition with other primates some of them larger, like the giant baboons they had at that period, and some of them smaller. So if you look there, we've got almost an exact analogue of the monster template. I think there's something in our gestalt, in our fossil memories. We're mentally set up to have this template in our brains for survival. And under certain conditions, I think these phantoms from the past, these mental phantoms, can rise again. It's something that interferes with our mind on a level that we don't fully understand. Quite different to true cryptozoology per se, which is searching for animals that are biologically real in the sense that you and I are.
So, okay, so they may not be intelligent to a point, but obviously I've heard stories about them burying their own dead. Do you buy that kind of story?
I don't think that a Sasquatch or an orang pendek or a yeti would bury its dead. Maybe an almasty would cover them with stones or something.
Right.
But I've certainly not heard of it. Elephants find the sight of their dead distressing, and then they'll throw vegetation onto them. So it's not impossible, but I don't think burying them in the sense that humans do.
Yeah, I mean, I asked another sort of foreign cryptozoologist this same question. I mean, will you ever see a Bigfoot in your life, do you think?
I don't know. I'd like to. I'd like to see one of these creatures. I think I've come very close to seeing... I've come close to seeing the orang pendek. I've come very close, I believe, to seeing the almasty. When we were over there, we were staking out a abandoned farmhouse near the town of Neutrino,
right,
in the Caucasus Mountains, and it had been abandoned since the early 70s. It consisted of 3 rooms and an L-shaped veranda running around it. A few years ago, there were some shepherds just sitting on the veranda one night. When the door at the end of the veranda opened, a 7-foot almasty stepped onto the veranda, picked up one of the men, just moved him gently out of the way, walked along the veranda, jumped off the end of the veranda and continued on its way. And there have been a number of other sightings around here. We were staking it out, we had camera traps and stuff, and the animal is supposed to make a sort of twittering noise like a bird. And we'd been waiting all night, and about 10 o'clock I heard this twittering noise, and I thought, good lord, could this be the almasty, or is it just a bird or something? The camera traps went off. We waited and waited, nothing happened. About 2:30 in the morning, we went to warm ourselves around a little stove in one of the rooms, and they had big oak doors about 7 feet tall. The door was slightly ajar by 4 or 5 inches. There was starlight and moonlight pouring in because it was a very clear night.
Yeah.
Then, as we were sat around this stove, one of my colleagues had fallen to sleep. My other colleague, Adam Davis, was there with me, and we heard a very deep guttural vocalisation. The nearest I can get to it is but it was much more throaty, much deeper. And I turned to Adam and said, "Did you hear that?" And he nodded. Then about 25 seconds later, something walked along the veranda. Whatever that something was, it was on its hind legs, and it was tall enough to block out the moonlight and the starlight to a height of 7 feet.
That's strange, isn't it, that you actually got to see this? I mean, is that a case that it telepathically knew you were looking for some sort of, assurance that they exist? Or was it just a case of, if you keep doing something for long enough, then of course you're going to get the results?
I don't think it's anything to do with telepathics. I mean, whatever it was on its hind legs and it was tall. We grabbed our cameras, we rushed out, whatever it was had gone. It disappeared into the night. It was moving very fast. I can't say for sure it was an almasty, because I didn't see it. All I saw was the moonlight and the starlight get blocked out by this thing walking past, but I didn't get a clear view of it. But it wasn't a bear.
Right.
It was up on its hind legs, and it was a bear would have made much more noise.
And would you say the description of this creature is a bit like the, Bigfoot from the Harry and the Hendersons?
No. Bigfoot from the Harry and Hendersons doesn't even look like Bigfoot, let alone the almasty. The almasty is much more human-looking than either the yeti or the Sasquatch. They made the costume in Harry and the Hendersons look way too human. Descriptions of the yeti in particular, when you show witnesses various reconstructions of known apes and of hominids and of prehistoric species. The one that they always point to as looking the most like what they saw is the gorilla. The face and the head are very like a gorilla's, and they'll say it looks like an upright walking gorilla, but it's not down on all fours, it's walking erect like a man.
No, so I mean, what possibly could it be if it's not what you've just already cited? I mean, it's a bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in that area where they are and have been cited before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having that experience as a sort of, well, you know, it's that spark to keep you going in the right direction, I suppose, isn't it?
It is, yes. It was quite an incredible night. I just wished I could have got a photograph of it.
You've not just looked into Bigfoot. I mean, you've researched so many different types of cryptoids, and I think let's sort of move on from the Bigfoot now, and well, let's have a look at Loch Ness just quickly. I mean, what sort of research have you done to say that the Loch Ness monster is real?
I've been up to Loch Ness and I've been to Loch Morar. The interesting thing is that Loch Morar, very few people know about it. It hasn't got a visitors centre, it hasn't got shops selling plastic monsters or monster t-shirts. There's no tourist industry there. There's a hotel, there's a little village, but they still have strange sightings there in the water, and most of the sightings never get out of the village. And when I was up there, I was talking to a local landlady, and she was telling me that a couple of guys from Yorkshire had been on a fishing holiday there, and they were out on a boat. One guy was operating the tiller, the other one was looking out, and the one on lookout says, "Oh, careful, there's a dead tree in the water." And they saw what they thought was a 30-foot long tree or log in the water. They realised it was swimming against the wind. It wasn't floating, being pushed by the wind. It drew alongside their boat, and then it sort of arched up in a sort of huge inverted U shape and dived under the boat. And apparently they made it back to shore in record time and packed up. But stories like that don't get out.
No.
So there's something there. I don't think it's a prehistoric reptile. The only thing that makes any sense for these things to be in places like Loch Ness and Loch Morar is some sort of huge fish, something that's getting its oxygen directly from the water. If it was an air breather, we'd see it breaching more often. And the thing that fits the bill more than anything else is some form of huge eel.
Yeah, but I mean, surely that size of eel would have been caught by radar. Sorry, sonar.
Eels will spend an awful lot of time buried in the mud at the bottom and not show up on sonar. And we're not talking about a population of them. We're talking about one or two freaks, mutants of the common, mutant strains of the common eel that arise every so often.
You say it arrives every so often. I mean, I suppose some of the evidence there has been... Well, I mean, there was the famous picture of the Loch Ness Monster, but I mean, you would argue that that picture isn't really representative of anything, wouldn't you?
No. The main story going around is that it's a fake using plastic wood attached to a toy submarine. Apparently, plastic wood wasn't even available when that photograph was alleged to have been taken. So I don't think it is a fake. Equally, I don't think the surgeon's photograph shows the Loch Ness Monster. It looks to me like it's showing some sort of water bird.
And again, I suppose you'll never... There'll be those on the fence that say, well, no, Nessie's real. Obviously, because they've got their culture of shops to look after, I suppose, and the tourism that it brings in. But look, from a serious standpoint, and your sort of opinion, you would say, no, this is not what we think it is.
I'm not saying that Nessie doesn't exist. I'm saying it's not what people think it is or want it to be. It's not a prehistoric reptile. Something like that just couldn't exist in those cold, barren waters. And 10,000 years ago, Loch Ness was a giant ice cube.
Yeah, I mean, talking about cold, barren places, one thing that I just want to touch back on again, one thing we've not sort of finished off talking about really was the Yeti. Where's your research for the Yeti took you in? What direction has that took you in right now?
Just last year we were in the Garo Hills of northern India on the trail of the Yeti, and its local name there is the Mandai Burung, the forest man. The Yeti isn't a creature of the desolate snow wastes. It's not white. That lame idea comes from a mistranslation of the Sino-Tibetan name Mito Kagme, which was mistranslated as abominable man of the snows, when it actually meant abominable man of the rocks.
Right.
Up above the snow line, there's nothing for it to eat, so it's a creature of the forests. Its colour is black or dark chestnut brown. There's never, to my knowledge, been a sighting of a white yeti. There's very rare sightings of white Sasquatch in North America, but to my knowledge, never a white yeti. So forget you ever heard the yeti was white.
Right. So another folklore, maybe.
Yeah. We were talking to witnesses in the Garrow Hills, and they were describing an animal with black fur, standing around 3 meters or 10 feet tall, looking like a huge upright gorilla or a huge hair-covered man.
Let's move on from the Yeti here. There's just so many to talk about, Richard. I want to just take us on to so you're talking about sort of upright creatures, big cats. I mean, again, is that something you buy into, as in or is that more myth than
big cat? There are big cats in the UK, and there have been for a long time. It's almost mundane when you compare it to some of the more exotic creatures I've looked for. In 1980, a puma was actually captured alive in Inverness, and it lived the rest of its life in the Highland Wildlife Park. They called it Felicity. Lynx have been shot in Britain. Indian leopard cats have been captured. Jungle cats have been knocked down on the roads. We know these exotic cats are here. Just a few weeks ago, I saw what looked very like a puma standing in a field just outside of Exeter. I was actually on a coach going past when I saw it, and it certainly wasn't a dog. It looked to me like a very dark phase of the puma. So these animals are here. There's no doubt about that.
And have they ever been known to sort of attack anyone, or?
There have been a few pretty unbelievable stories. There was one story about a couple that had baited a panther out using some carrion, some offal, and they'd gone back to the graveyard that the creature was supposed to be in, and they were approaching where they'd put down the offal, and the lady was supposed to have trod on the creature's tail by accident, and it jumped up and slashed her stomach. You wouldn't get close enough to a panther to tread on its tail by accident. The senses are far too acute for that. And I saw the alleged wound, and it wasn't anything like what a panther would have flicked on you. There's another story from a place called Trellick in Wales, where a young lad, was supposed to have been clawed in the face by a panther, and once again I saw the pictures of the wounds. If he'd been clawed in the face by a panther, he wouldn't have a face left. So,
why do you think people misrepresent these creatures then? I mean, where have they got their misrepresentation from?
I don't know. I think it's probably attention seeking.
Yeah, you think there's a bit of that going on? Yeah. So I mean, you saw the picture of the guy that had his face clawed.
Yeah.
And again, after seeing that picture, you knew it wasn't anything.
No. If that was a cat's claw, it would have probably had 4 slashes along it, depending on what angle it caught him at.
We're not saying in general that cryptoids don't exist, because there are, in your opinion, cryptoids that obviously do exist.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, big cats in Britain, they're there. It's just that I don't personally believe, or I've not seen any evidence they've ever attacked anybody.
No. And with the big cats then, that sort of, moves on to, well, not quite, but the big birds. What kind of research have you done on big birds, for example? Thunderbirds?
Well, I've never actually looked into the thunderbirds. A friend of mine from North America, Ken Garrard, has written a book and researched on the sightings of these large creatures. It's quite a quandary.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with a animal that's supposed to be maybe 25-30 feet across the wings, and you would have thought that they would be seen much more often, and with all the bird watchers in North America, all the twitchers out there looking for birds, you'd think they'd be reporting more often.
You should have thought so, wouldn't you?
And you would have also thought that we would have found their nest sites. Now, there were giant birds in North America and South America. We call them teratons.
Yeah.
They're a type of New World vulture, and they ranged in size from 12 to 25 feet across the wings. The largest of them, Argentavis, was enormous. It would have stood as tall as a man. I would love to believe that they're still alive, but I'm just not seeing the evidence for it.
Could they be possible UFOs, some of them?
Well, they're flying and they're unidentified and they're objects, so Technically, I suppose.
Yeah, but your work never sort of strays into too much of the paranormal. Parapsychology maybe, but not paranormal, would you say?
It depends on your definition of paranormal. I am not in the least interested in UFOs. I never have been.
No connection, no?
No, I've never been interested in UFOs. I'm quite interested in folklore and in ghosts. Although I think that most ghost experiences may be more to do with human brain function. When I say I'm interested in parapsychology, I mean serious parapsychology. I don't mean a lot of bad actors running around somewhere at night screaming and pretending to be possessed and things like that. That is just low rent garbage.
No, that's not for you, is it? Right,
I think we know what we're talking about there.
Well, I suppose, I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I mean, some of those people may think the same about your work, but then again, some will not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just of course. But there's fors and against for everything. Everyone's got a different truth, depending where they're brought up, depending what culture they're brought up in. There's no one truth, is there?
Probably not. I mean, like it was said, that the truth is seldom simple and never pure.
Well, that's a good way of summing it up, I think. Absolutely. And there's nothing as simple as some of these creatures, because they are, well, they're fascinating for one thing. But obviously, you know, if we could capture one of them, it would just make such a difference to people's understanding, wouldn't it, of prehistoric creatures, I think.
Yeah, well, you would have thought that in recent years, mainstream science would have taken a bit of a more interest in it. Now, there have been mainstream scientists that have been interested in it, like Professor Grover Krantz and Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans and other people, but they're very much in the minority. A good friend of mine, Dr. Darren Naish, is very interested in cryptozoology, but they're very much in the minority. But in recent years, we've had a new species of tapir found, a new species of peccary, a large pig-like animal, the Vukwang ox, which was a strange creature that seems to be sort of the stage way between the cattle family and the antelopes. It's found in Vietnam. We've had Homo floresiensis found on the island of Flores. Bones, not fossils, subfossils. They're not old enough to be fossils. Just about 12,000 years old. And this is a species of hominid that would have been living alongside modern man, that was only about 3 feet tall. And in the legends of the island, they talk about a race of hairy goblins they call the Ibu Gogo, which translates as ancestor that ate everything. And they, according to the stories, they would come down and steal the crops of human beings and occasionally kill their livestock with bamboo spears. So the story goes that in the end, the people who got angry with them got all the Ibu Gogo drunk on palm wine, and when they went back to their cave, blocked up the cave entrance with palm fibres and set fire to them and smoked them to death. So the story goes. But apparently the Homo floresiensis that were discovered were killed by a volcanic eruption, so there might be a germ of truth in the story. Incredible. And there are alleged sightings of the creatures still on Flores, so there may still be some of these little hominids still around. Incredible.
It's very fascinating work that you do, but what about, obviously we've mentioned there the eels and the Loch Ness connection, but wasn't there, what about the strange fish? Is that ever come up in your work?
Well, we were once asked up to a wildfowl reserve in Lancashire called Martin Mere, and there were stories about a creature the size of a car swimming around in this lake devouring swans. I all found it rather unlikely. We went up there to investigate, and we talked to the head warden, the late Pat Wisniewski, and he says, yes, there's something massive in there. I've seen it swimming around, and he pointed to a settee, and he said, it's the size of that settee. We talked to witnesses who'd seen birds pulled under, swans attacked. And this wasn't a large lake. We're not talking about Lake Oakenhagen or anything like that. It was a couple of acres and maybe 5 feet deep maximum. And I said to my colleagues, there's no way a large predator is living in this lake. Half an hour later I saw it, and it was a Wells catfish, approximately 8 feet long, an immense thing. These things were brought over by the Victorians from Russia.
Right.
They live in Eastern Europe and Russia. and they can get up to 16 feet. And there was a group of people called the Acclimatisation Society, led by Frank Buckland, Queen Victoria's head of fisheries, and they would introduce various animals into the British countryside to see if they could survive, mainly to be used as a source of food. And one of them was the Wells catfish.
Right. So that's one of the main ones, right? Well, I suppose, what's some of the bigger projects then that you've sort of looked into? I mean, obviously you've every year is sort of a new discovery in some sense, isn't it? But
yeah.
What would you say over the past few years have been some of the sort of big realizations that you've had?
Well, the long-term thing we're concentrating on is the orang pendek. This is going to be my fourth expedition there, and my colleague Adam Davis, I believe it's his 6th or 7th. So that's something we keep returning to because we believe it's on the cusp of being discovered. It's on the very cusp of being discovered, and we want to be on the front line. So we've put a lot of time and effort into that.
One of the sort of Earth-like creatures I've wanted to talk to you about, just because the name is the Death Worm. Just tell us a bit about the Death Worm.
Mongolian Death Worm.
Yeah, Mongolian Death Worm.
The nomads of the Gobi Desert refer to it as the Alroy Hoi Hoi, and they go in very great fear of it. When the stories come over to Britain, it's a bit like Chinese whispers, or Mongolian whispers in this case. It's morphed into this 6-foot-long creature that can spit acid and make blasts of electricity that kill people. When you actually talk to the witnesses who've seen it, they describe it as being around 2 feet long, shaped like a salami, reddish brown and scaly. None of them believe that it can generate electricity, or throwing lightning as they call it locally. They do believe that it's highly poisonous and it can spit, although nobody knew anyone that had seen it spitting or had been killed by the venom. Most witnesses just saw it lying in the desert, but it engendered such terror that they would run away. And one man who saw it in his youth while he was herding camels told his parents, and they packed up their gur, these circular tents they have, and they moved themselves and the livestock out of the area. One woman said she'd seen it slithering in and out of a hole. One man said he'd seen one devouring a mouse. Another young guy said he'd actually picked one up on the end of a stick. It's not a true worm from the description, and it's far too dry anyway for a true annelid. We're dealing with some sort of burrowing reptile. The animal that matches the description most is an amphisbaena, and they are a group of burrowing reptiles related to but distinct from lizards and snakes. They're also sometimes called worm lizards. They're these odd sausage-shaped burrowing reptiles, and I think the death worm is a much larger, much more robust, undiscovered species of amphisbaena.
Well, and again, I was going to say to you here, I mean, how far in history does the death worm go back? Because, I mean, I've never heard of it before, Rich.
It goes back in the writings quite a long way. There was a paleontologist called Roy Chapman Andrews. In the 1920s, he went into the Gobi Desert looking for fossil humanoids. He was looking for the ancestors of man. And what he did find was a hell of a lot of fossilised dinosaur eggs. And he was the guy they based Indiana Jones on, apparently. He was asked by the Prime Minister of Mongolia to look out for the death worm while he was there. He never actually saw it, but apparently there are lots of scrolls going back centuries that refer to this creature.
It's just incredible. So, again, like you say, it goes back in time. And if people do their research, which is what you've done basically, you've done your research, you've looked into this, and the evidence is there, isn't it?
It certainly is. I wouldn't be wasting my meagre resources going out and looking for something that I didn't think existed or we had a fighting chance of finding.
No, of course not. And again, is there information on your website for some of these creatures that we've touched on?
Yes, yeah. Our website, www.cfz.org.uk. There's a lot of information on there.
Now, we'll put a link on there before on the page on our website. If people just want to go to your last name, Freeman, on past guests, obviously they'll be able to look up and see the information about Richard Freeman and the links to the website. But before we go as well, there is the lake monsters, which I've always found fascinating as a young kid, and I think most people would have heard of lake monsters. Now, you must have done some research into this subject.
Yeah, I researched the Loch Ness monster and the monster of Loch Marah, and further afield we've looked for dragon-like creatures in Asia and West Africa. In Asia, back in the year of the dragon, in the year 2000, I was on the trail of something called the naga, which is an immense serpentine animal some 60 feet long with a crest or fin on the head. And the witnesses I was talking to were all describing the same animal with black scales that have a sort of greenish sheen when you get up close to them. And then, funnily enough, when I was in India just last year researching the Mandai Barung, the Indian yeti, we heard stories of exactly the same creature, only up there they call it Sankuni, and they say it's this enormous black snake with a fin or a crest recalling the comb of a rooster, and both animals are associated with water and rainfall. In West Africa, we heard stories of a creature called the Ninkananka, once again a serpentine beast with a crest on the head, associated with rainfall appearing in the rainy season. And out there they hold it in great dread. They believe that if you see one you'll die within 5 years, or it can even strike you dead with its deadly gaze, a bit like the basilisk of medieval war. And we came across a village. We told this story by a man who says his uncle had seen one of these things in the swamp, and the whole village was abandoned. They were terrified of it.
But do you think this is the whole thing about people's truths are different in different cultures? I mean, I did say that to you before, and would that cultural truth be the same over here? And I wonder why not.
Not necessarily. We came to the conclusion with the West African stories, though not with the Asian ones, just with the West African ones, that the Ninkananka was probably a demonisation of a pre-Islamic python cult. The python is venerated over lots of Africa, and when a new religion comes in to an area, oftentimes they will demonise the deities of the old religion. Satan, more or less, the idea of this man with horns is a demonisation of the Greek god Pan and the Celtic Cernunnos, the horned nature gods, who are never evil but were turned into monsters by Christianity.
And again, like you said there, this goes back to ancient texts, really, I suppose, and it's always been there. So a lot of this stuff, these subjects keep linking back. So that's nice to be able to see that connection there, because at least people can go do their own research. I mean, if they don't, if they've read your stuff and they're still not too sure, well, go do the research themselves, I suppose.
Certainly.
And one last sort of cryptoid that I've left to the end, which is the dragons. Now, for me, it's fascinating that you've looked into this. Just tell us a bit about the sort of, as you class it, the dragons of Africa.
Well, the dragon is the great granddaddy of all the monsters. Forget about vampires and demons and werewolves. They're nothing. They're Johnny-come-latelys. The dragon is the most ancient, the most powerful, and the most widespread of all monsters. It's found in every single culture on Earth, and there are cave paintings of it going back 25,000 years. It's only really in the West, in Europe, and in Hawaii to a lesser extent, that the dragon is associated with fire. Everywhere else it's associated with water, living in or around water, having power over rainfall. A lot of the early stories from Sumeria and from Babylon and from India are all about creatures that could withhold water and cause drought or bring life-giving water to the land. So we're dealing with a large serpentine animal that lives in or around water, and there are a remarkable amount of sightings of creatures like this even today. At the turn of the last century in Along Bay in Vietnam, there was a series of sightings by the French Navy, and we're talking about lieutenants and captains and admirals that saw these creatures that they swore looked exactly like Asian dragons. 60 to 100 feet long, serpentine, and spiny crest running along the back, and snorting vapour like a whale's breath from its nostrils as it breached. And Asian dragons, their breath is supposed to condense and form rain, and even these things were even shot upon with some quite powerful guns, and apparently they had very little effect.
Right.
But these were mass sightings, even today in places like Lake Tianqi in China. As recently as 2004, there were sightings of a serpentine creature with black scales and a horse-like head. There's a story from 1980 in Lake Wembu in Tibet of a member of the local Communist Party tethering his yak next to this lake, and the creature coming out and killing his yak and dragging it off into the lake. This is a high altitude lake, much too cold for crocodiles. And the description is this huge creature with a great long neck and great jaws and teeth and scaly skin, and no one's ever gone to look for it.
And again, these cold conditions, that is because...
They're found, these things are found all over the world. The Along Bay is in the tropics. The lake it's in Vietnam. It's off the coast of Vietnam. The lake in Tibet is high altitude and cold, but these creatures are seen all over.
Right. So it's not just particular kinds of weather conditions, or temperature conditions. Then it's the whole range. Well, I suppose, thinking about it, we're doing this recording in Wales, and what's the symbolism for the Welsh? It's the dragon.
The red dragon.
Yeah. And where does that come from?
It may have come from the banners that were used by some of the Romans. They had dragon-like banners they were rather like windsocks. They had metal head and jaws, and then a long tube of material that made a whistling sound that came through it. It could have come from there, but it's like the layers of the onions. Where did the Romans get the idea from it? Where does it come from? I think it all comes back to these very real creatures.
What can we do if someone wants to research these creatures for themselves and sort of help out with the work that you're doing?
Well, get in contact through the website, www.cfz.org.uk, or you can email me, richard@cfz.org.uk.
Okay, so that's how people can get in contact with you, because like you've said before on the show, you are, it would be, I think you mentioned it would be nice to get some sponsorship.
It would be great to get sponsorship,
and start travelling.
We're more than open to doing a deal with some company to advertise whatever it is they want. We'll advertise it and we'll name our expedition after it. We'll wear the t-shirts. And the thing is, we get a lot of media coverage. We get coverage on radio, television, magazine, newspapers. So it would be a golden opportunity in advertising for a company to sponsor one of our expeditions.
And where would you go with the money, though?
It depends. We're going out to Sumatra in September. That is one thing we could do with some help with. We have lots of other ideas. There's a lake in southern Siberia called Lake Chany, wherein there is a very strange tale unfurling. In about the past 7 years or so, 19 people are said to have been killed by a 30-foot long serpentine animal that lives in the lake. One witness said she saw her son, an ex-soldier, on a boat that was rammed by the creature. He fell into the water, it grabbed him, he was never seen again. Another story, 2 fishermen on a boat. The creature overturned it, grabbed one man, and the other one made it to the shore. They say occasionally body parts bearing huge teeth marks wash up on the lake shore, and they want an official investigation.
Wow.
Nobody knows what the hell this creature is.
And why would they not sort of investigate that?
I've no idea. You know as much as I do now. I would like to get over there, interview some of the witnesses, try and get local people with knowledge, make a map of where the sightings have been, the attacks have been, then go out on the lake with hydrophones, with cameras, with bait, see if we can find something.
Okay.
You'll never find anything if you don't look. That's just another one. We want to go back to Mongolia for the death worm. We want to do the Tasmanian wolf or thylacine in Australia. We would like to do the almasty again because we think we got very close to seeing the almasty.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But for the sound of it,
yeah.
But I mean, what books are you writing now? I mean, that tie into some of this work that you've been talking about.
The latest book I wrote, it was just published last year, was called The Great Yokai Encyclopedia: An A to Z of Japanese Monsters. This is about creatures from the folklore of Japan, which is the most bizarre folklore I've ever come across in the world. They have things like Mazuchi, which is a river-dwelling dragon that was supposed to release his sperm into the water, and if there were women bathing downstream, they'd be impregnated and give birth to dragons. There is Mureu, which is a giant, upright-walking, carnivorous rabbit, which digs up human corpses to eat their livers.
God.
Japanese folklore is just so mind-bendingly bizarre you wouldn't believe it, and collectively monsters in Japan are called yokai, and this is the first major work in the English language about yokai, and it's an introduction and an encyclopedia. At the minute I'm working on a book on the orang pendek, which I'll finish off after the September expedition. It's about the orang pendek and related creatures that have been seen elsewhere.
Right. And just very briefly, just tell me about the Museum for Fortean Cryptozoology.
Well, we have a centre, the Centre for Fortean Zoology, the only organisation of its kind in the world that's dedicated to studying mysterious creatures. We have our own publishing company that goes with it, CFZ Press, where we publish books about cryptozoology and related topics. That all came about because we were sick of going into bookshops, looking in the esoteric section and seeing endless loads of tripe like feng shui for your cats and channeling dolphin spirits from Atlantis. We wanted the subject to be took seriously, so we started our own publishing company. We take expeditions all over the world. We write about it, and it's all based in a little town, a little village called Wolseley in northern Devon, and that's where the main office is. But now we've got offices in the US as well, and in Australia, and we're getting one in New Zealand too. So it's an international organisation, and it's got subscribers and members all over the world.
So you're a director, are you?
I am the zoological director.
Zoological director, yeah. and there's a team of members behind you as well.
There's John Downs, who's the director. There's Graham Inglis. There's Karina Downs, and there's all sorts of people doing all sorts of jobs, usually for free.
Yeah, okay.
It exists seemingly on fresh air most of the time.
Right. But it's your passion, it's your love, and that's what you're tuning to doing. And obviously, you've entertained a lot of people as well with fact, as far as you know, and that's got to be worthwhile. So
you've only got one life. You've got to do it. Spend it doing something you're interested in.
Absolutely.
And no one else is doing this research. Nobody at all is doing serious research.
No, and that's sad that the more mainstream media doesn't take this subject a bit more seriously.
It would make one hell of a good TV series, going out and looking for these creatures. If you selected, say, 10 of the most likely.
Absolutely.
And went out, did an hour documentary on each, looking for them. Even if you found nothing, the travelogue and the talking to the witnesses and going to these places would be incredible. On some of my expeditions, I've been to places where no Westerner has ever been before. Some caves in Indochina, remote oases in the Gobi Desert, a deep lost valley in Kerinci National Park in Sumatra. No Westerner had ever been to these places before.
That must be an incredible feeling to do that. I mean, to go to a place which is not, sort of on a map, and then to know that you're the first Westerner there. That must.
It's absolutely amazing.
Incredible.
I mean, even the locals with the Lost Valley in Sumatra, we found one old man who had been down there in his youth, been down there fishing, and when we went down there, this great crevasse, incredible. And, if we had a TV crew with us, if we had the backing of a TV company making documentaries about this, it would make wonderful television. We would have the finances to do it properly and get out to these places.
Yeah.
And it would make stunning television. There's only so many times you can have programs of Z-grade celebrities making asses of themselves. There's only so many programs you can do about buying and selling houses. There's only so many cookery shows you can do. Now, come on. Television can be this great tool for entertainment and education. And I think recently it's turned a corner. We're seeing good drama on television again now. And there's always been good wildlife documentaries with the likes of David Attenborough. But there's still an awful lot of tripe on television, and it can do better than this. And
well, you also, the Cryptozoology Centre have their own sort of small TV channel, don't they?
We have CFZ TV, which you can get through the website. We film our expeditions, and then usually they're edited into feature-length documentaries, usually 1.5 to 2 hours long, and We went after the giant anaconda in Guyana. We've done the Indian yeti, which is going up fairly soon. We've done the almasti, all sorts of things. The Mongolian Death Worm, and it's all up there on the website.
Okay, and just again to reiterate your website, Richard?
It's www.cfz.org.uk.
Okay, well, Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
To find out more information on our guest, Richard Freeman, just go to cfz.org.uk or go to my website, themoreshow.co.uk, and look up Richard Freeman under past guests. Also, you can find out more about the past shows that we do and any future shows by logging onto our Facebook group, themoreshow.co.uk. So until then, take care.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.